Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down, as always, with Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football, and got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk mostly about the Seahawks and the head coaching search and hire, how that process played out, what we're doing as far as assistant coaches that might be in play. We've already made one pretty substantial hire into the organization to help Mike Macdonald out. John Schneider went through a major process, Keith, that took a while to play out. Patience paid off, which I thought was pretty amazing. But all along, I think you're hearing from Mike Macdonald and some of the folks around him that he always wanted this job. After it became evident that he was going to be another head coaching candidate, and Pete Carroll was let go, he had his eye on this spot. And he was also waiting, I think, for the Seahawks to come after they came out of the playoffs there in Baltimore. And they hired Mike Macdonald to a 6-year deal, 9th coach in Seahawks history. And to me, I think it's knocked it out of the park, home run type of move by John Schneider. I think early in the process, you're nervous about a young gun coming in, especially after the long tenured coaching history of Pete Carroll. And they go from the oldest coach in the NFL to the youngest. And yeah, that's going to make you a little nervous. But the more I'm reading about Mike Macdonald and the process and who he is as a person, I feel better and better about it. So anyway, Keith, come on in. Tell me what you think.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm excited for the hire. And the more I read about the guy and the more I learn about his relationships with players and other coaches, the more I like it. I will say that I read this morning that Washington came after him hard and threw a bunch of money in his direction, trying to stop him from taking the Seattle job. And he took the Seattle job. That's probably why the 6-year deal, which is longer than what you would usually give a first-time head coach. So Seattle had to up the offer a little bit to make sure that it happened. But yeah, I mean, they got the guy they wanted, and it's the guy they kind of wanted from the beginning. I know that fans wanted Ben Johnson from Detroit, the offensive coordinator there, but it sounded like John Schneider, was very much in on Macdonald just from the beginning, and he was the guy kind of targeted, and everyone else was like,
"Yeah,
can you wow us enough to not go after this guy?"
Sure.
And I know that people will say that, oh, that's just, John and everyone trying to spin this and whatnot, because they didn't even talk to him until after, 2 days before they hired him. Yeah, but they knew who he was, right? They've talked to all these people who know him.
And they couldn't talk to him.
Yeah. They could have talked to him about other things, over the last, few months. As long as it's within the rules and all of that. And I think they knew who he was schematically. They'd heard from a pile of different people about what he was like personally, his leadership style, all that kind of stuff. And that is why they were like, you know what, this is the guy. He may be young, but he's really, really smart, and he knows defense better than anybody. And he's like right on that cutting edge. He's the defensive Sean McVay. And they were like, we're going to go get this guy, and make this work. And that's kind of why they interviewed everybody possible, because they were just waiting. They were just waiting. So they interviewed people and, got an idea of, just picked their brains and how would they, go about winning, and what would they do with the roster, and just got a whole bunch of people's opinions on those kind of things while they waited for their guy to be available.
Yeah. I think, that process served John Schneider well, because I think John alluded to in the press conference they had this week together on stage that this process really started for John with the loss at Baltimore in the 2023 season. Decided the team would never look like that again. He was embarrassed. And the thought process of having Pete Carroll step aside as coach started at that point. And his future coach was on the other side of the ball, making Seattle look horrible. 1 for 12 or something like that on third downs, and
yes, the
season
Seahawks
low
had like
yards
160 total yards of offense.
Yeah, it was.
They just got destroyed in that game, and honestly, it didn't matter what Geno Smith and Shane Waldron wanted to do. Macdonald was 2 steps ahead of him, and it was just a thumping. And you got an idea of like, this is a guy that's going to outsmart you. He's going to outcoach you. The same way that Mike Shanahan, same way that Mike Shanahan does to a lot of coaches with his offensive scheme and that kind of stuff. He's really like good at what he does, and he'll scheme around anything, and he'll outcoach you. And Pete Carroll wasn't that guy. He was never that guy. What he was a master motivator, guy that, building a culture. He's the CEO type, but he was never the tactician. And they went and got a supreme tactician, and it's interesting, and it's an interesting play. So I like what they did there, and I mean, we're in a really tough division. I mean, this is one of if not the toughest divisions in football, and it's an arms race at sometimes. And the Seahawks just did what they had to do in order to keep up.
Yeah, I think that you could go one of 2 ways. The offensive coordinator, the offensive minded head coach, etc., was a strategy favored by some, or you could go to the other side, the counterpunch to Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, and Gannon now. But the Seahawks decided to do that. I think they just chose the best candidate. Ben Johnson may have been on their radar as 1A, 1B type thing with Macdonald, but according to credible sources, Ben Johnson was asking for the moon as far as money was concerned, and he never really had any serious offers, no serious really interviews, and shut it down as soon as he basically got out of the playoffs and able to interview in person. That process didn't last very long for him. He just kind of said, I'm going back. And I found that process really interesting. And they moved quickly. Like, Schneider didn't miss a beat. They moved extremely quickly. They were in Baltimore the very next morning, had the interview with Macdonald. And by that early afternoon and evening, Macdonald was already on an airplane to Seattle to basically solidify the deal and get it done. So hats off to Schneider and company for just kind of making it happen. His first major move as a senior director of player personnel, essentially. And I don't know if he's executive vice president or not. I haven't heard that role for him, but he went out and did this all by himself, made this hire, and did a great job. But that's only the beginning, really.
It's only the beginning. So then we started hearing about, if you're going to hire a defensive-minded head coach, you got to hire an offensive coordinator, right? Because that's what's going to make or break this hire, is whether or not he gets someone to run the offense that can manage the offense. And unfortunately, the reason why everyone wants an offensive head coach is because if he gets a good offensive coordinator, they'll be hired as a head coach in 2 years and you'll be starting over. And here's that. I like that Seattle went defense, because if you look across the league, everybody's hiring offensive coordinators to be their head coach. And at some point, the talent pool starts to thin. And you see a lot of guys that probably, in the past, maybe wouldn't have gotten a shot at this point, but they are because they're the best offensive coach available, not the best coach available. So I like what they did, but he's going to need an offensive assistant, and he's looking at guys. He's looking at Detroit, and that system and their passing game coordinator. He's looked at Grubb, the guy who was at Washington with DeBoer and has then moved to Alabama with DeBoer and might be coming back to Seattle before he even does anything with Alabama to become Seattle's. These are inexperienced guys. These are guys who've never coached in the NFL.
I think it's wild, Keith. It's to me, it's just it's unreal compared to the stability that you can call it what you want, the Pete Carroll regime, but the stability there was unreal for the most part. I mean, they went through 3 offensive coordinators while he was there, 4. But it seemed like it was pretty consistent, even style wise and temperament and experience levels and so forth. You never felt like Seattle was really going out there and hiring an inexperienced guy for whatever value judgment you want to put on that. And now all of a sudden we've got a very inexperienced head coach, never been a head coach before, 2 years of DC experience, and now we're going to go out and hire somebody that doesn't have any experience at all calling plays in the NFL or even been in the NFL. And that's a little freaky to me, but
it is. But he countered that. He hasn't named an offensive coordinator yet, but those are the guys that so far he's talked to about it. But he countered him being inexperienced and the offensive coordinator possibly being super inexperienced by going and getting all the experience that he's going to need. He just hired an assistant head coach in Leslie Frazier, former head coach, long time NFL coach, and
defensive coordinator.
Everything. And I love that hire. This is when Sean McVay got hired, right? His first hire was Wade Phillips, who'd been around the block 18 times. And even though he was only with Sean McVay for 2 years, that experience really paid off and helped that transition happen. This is Macdonald's Wade Phillips, right? He went and got a very experienced guy to help him just stay organized and do the things that need to happen in his first time through the whole system. And I love it. And this is what he needed. And
in addition, I mean, he's viewed as one of the best defensive coordinators in the business.
Yes, he is.
Well regarded as a player when he was playing, and then as a teacher, as a coach. He's coordinated 4 of the top 10 scoring defenses, during his defensive coordinating, especially at Buffalo most recently. And also he was a mentor to Macdonald when Macdonald was kind of a defensive backs coach, and Leslie Frazier was the defensive coordinator and mentor to Macdonald. And so when that relationship came up this week, Leslie Frazier had like 4 or 5 different options to go to. A lot of teams with young coaches were asking him to come on as an assistant, and he chose Seattle because of Mike Macdonald.
And he chose Seattle because of Macdonald.
Yeah.
Not, that like Macdonald was the reason why he chose to come to Seattle. Which, it's interesting and I like it.
But you're right in that adds an element of experience and knowledge and stability to this coaching staff to kind of get through the bumps of the first year or even 2, and it allows them, I think, to take that chance at offensive coordinator potentially because I think it just adds stability to the entire room. They brought back Carl Scott, the defensive backs coach from Seattle. Now, I'm not exactly sure about this hire. I like Carl Scott. He's a good teacher, kind of that Nick Saban tree of coaching, which also Macdonald has in his background. So I think that was an attractive guy for him to retain on his staff, plus the experience with the defensive backs on Seattle's roster. But I also know that Seattle lost control of its defensive back room this last year as well, as far as players not adhering to the scheme and all that kind of stuff.
Jamal Adamsing. And I think that I hear you and I understand that. I'm less concerned about that because of there were some major disconnects in Seattle on defense last year, and it wasn't just Jamal Adams and Tariq Woolen going rogue a little bit. It felt like some of it was Clint Hurt. Just people tuned him out, including his own coaches.
Yeah.
And Carl Scott was trying to do the best he could with what he had. And I think it's one of those things where there's just a disconnect between what they're being told and what Clint Hurt was expecting them to do. And I don't know if that is anything to do with Carl Scott and more just lack of trust with the defensive coordinator who wasn't getting it done.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And some disconnect there. Obviously, they wouldn't have retained him, I think, on the staff if they felt like he was somehow involved in some of that disconnect stuff. But I'm just super excited. I mean, it's a transition. I mean, it really is. But they had it. It's a clean break. I think there was some concern there about Pete Carroll staying on as a figurehead and an advisor and advisory role and so forth. And I think John Schneider showed in the last couple of weeks that he really kind of just wanted a clean break from that. And I think this hire does that. And the Leslie Frazier hire does that. It just kind of, it eliminates that wishy-washy kind of thing where the new coach feels an obligation to allow Pete some leeway in the building with players, and that can get a little squishy at times. And now I think that is probably not going to happen.
Yeah. The more I thought about it, because I was big in on Dan Quinn, I just think that his track record of success, both as a defensive coordinator and as a head coach, he would come in, bring some juice to the building, and instantly, the team would just transition. But he was so connected to Pete Carroll because of their time together, and the fact that although he evolved Pete Carroll's defensive scheme, it did start with Pete Carroll's defensive scheme, and the team just wanted to start over. They wanted new ideas. And as far as scheme and stuff goes, they wanted that clean break. And so they went completely outside of the Pete Carroll coaching tree, which actually is harder to do than you might think, because his hands are on almost every team in this league at the moment, because his former coaches have spread out and they're everywhere. So for him, for the team to find someone who just wasn't related to the Pete Carroll tree, that felt like it was something that they really wanted to do.
And if there was one organization to do it from, it was the Baltimore Ravens organization.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a organization that's done it well for, I don't know how long now, 20, 25 years. Ozzie has done a great job there. And then Harbaugh, John has done a really good job. He's a good coach. He's a solid human. He hires well and puts together consistently good teams. And that's something. I mean, how can you not feel good about this hire? I mean, it's one of those things that if you are going to go in this direction, they did everything they could to make this selection a home run, and I think they did. anything can happen. Everything looks good on paper until it doesn't. New coaches get hired every year in the NFL, and the majority of those fail, with all good intentions. And I don't know why some things don't work and some things do, but Mike Macdonald seems different. He seems special. There's something about the guy, the way that he conducts himself, the way that he puts his players first and puts them in a position to be successful. A lot of those themes sound familiar because Pete had those similar things, but Pete, for everything that Pete was really good at, I think he just became stale over the last 5-6 seasons to where, and stubborn to where his systems and his way of doing things just became archaic very quickly in the NFL. And teams like the 49ers and the Rams and Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, we just couldn't figure them out defensively. We just couldn't solve that at all. And there was an unwillingness to try. And you're not going to have that in this new regime.
It looked like he completely changed the scheme because he went from his 4-3 to the 3-4, brought in all the Vic Fangio people to run the Vic Fangio defense. But when you go back and you watch the tape, it was the Vic Fangio scheme up front,
right?
But it was not.
But he modified the thing.
But it was Pete Carroll's comfortable zone that he knows and loves, and on the back end. And part of what made Fangio's scheme work when he was with the Bears was just sort of the cloud coverages that he would use, or the cover 6 where you have cover 2 on one side and cover 3 on the other, and shifting things around and making those changes late. And Pete wanted none of that.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he tried to evolve, but he also, kind of did get stale. I mean, in terms of the stuff, like at one point there were 10 teams running some variation of what Seattle had done in 2012. And last year there were 2. Dan Quinn in Dallas and Pete Carroll, right? So people shifted into what Seattle did really well during the Super Bowl run, but the NFL evolves very quickly. And what worked a year ago may not work now. And people have shifted away from it now. So there's...
and that's another reason to be excited about Macdonald, because he runs something now that's very successful, but he's also adaptable, runs multiple fronts, multiple schemes. Yeah, you can say he runs a 4-3 or a 3-4, but he runs both in kind of a hybrid situation. On their back end, they run multiple looks. They run man, but they also do cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, cover 6, in almost equal measure, depending on the opponent. So he likes to scheme for every opponent. He just doesn't run a blanket scheme out there like Pete Carroll used to do. Pete Carroll was very well known for just running what they do and having opponents challenge them with no real surprises. When you're talking about Mike Macdonald,
when you had a bunch of first ballot Hall of Famers on your defense, like Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Bobby Wagner, right? You had all of these, keeping it simple.
There was no disguises. There was no disguising anything.
Yeah. Just keeping it simple and saying, no matter what, you may know what we're doing, but we're still better than you, worked when you were better than them. It didn't once that talent left. There was no scheming anymore. And that was a problem. And
that's why you constantly were talking about being outcoached, teams adjusting on you, and you had no answer. How many conversations do we have over the last 5-6 years about that? So, but Mike Macdonald is the guy that adjusts. He's the guy that disguises coverages, disguises blitzing. I think I sent you a little short video. You said you watched that of 3 or 4 Baltimore plays against Seattle this last season, and you could see the evolution of the defense against Seattle and the way that they came up to the line of scrimmage, and then back backed off after the snap and confused Geno, and it was something. But they did that to every team. They schemed against every team. They didn't have a blanket defense to cover everything.
Yep. And so a couple of things with Macdonald as a coordinator. He was Rod Marinelli's, he was like his assistant. And then he left to go to Michigan and coordinate that defense, and then came back after a year because they decided to move on from Marinelli, and Marinelli's scheme and everything that he'd done had been really effective. But there was some feeling that it was starting to stale. And so they like, okay, well, let's make the switch, bring in someone who knows it. And the first thing that he did was evolve and be like, okay, so all these things that we used to do, we're going to do some of them. We're going to do them in slightly different ways, and we're going to disguise them better. And the defense went from being, having dropped, every year, gotten a little worse, suddenly being back to one of the top ones again, because he was innovative, because he changed stuff. And then this year, slightly different talent. They did things that were different than they did his first year as a coordinator. And so you have someone who looks at this and isn't, here's my way of doing it, this is my scheme. And when Pete first came up to Seattle, that was what he talked about. He's like, we find players with a unique talent, and we figure out how to take advantage of that unique talent. And after about 2013, 2014, that nobody ever said those words again. It just disappeared. And now we're running Pete's scheme. Now we have to have the single high safety, and we've got to have big corners, and we've got to, right. And it was everywhere. They were constantly looking to replace guys and find the next version of Richard Sherman or the next version of Earl Thomas, rather than finding players and developing what you do around the players you have. And
that's lazy.
It kind of is. It's just, I don't know. You go back, Mike Holmgren did the same thing, right? Offensively. He was the offensive coordinator for Bill Walsh when the West Coast offense was first conceived. And they were the ones that put it together, and he shifted and evolved and learned. And then he got to Seattle, and he was running the same thing. One of the biggest criticisms his last couple of years was that he didn't game plan. That he would offensively, he didn't game plan. He was kind of come in, we're going to do what we do, and we're going to believe in the system, and it doesn't matter who the other team is and what talent they have. We're going to do our thing. And the NFL had just passed him by. And that was starting to happen with Pete, and going young and going innovative and going, a master tactician makes a lot of sense. It really does. It's that counterpunch to what you used to do. I like it. I'm still going to miss Pete Carroll.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I'm still going to miss Pete Carroll. He was great at what he did, but there were deficiencies in his coaching style at the end.
What do you think of Mike Macdonald announcing that he's going to actually call the plays on defense initially?
I like it. I like the fact that he's taking ownership of that. He's taking control of that.
Made me feel a lot better, actually.
He's going to have guys like Leslie Frazier helping him implement game plans and teach other coaches so they can teach the players and all of those things. And but when it comes down to it, you want the architect being the one calling the plays, and that may not last. I mean, you look at what happened in Detroit with Dan Campbell on offense, right? He wasn't, then he was calling the plays, and then he gave it back to Ben Johnson, and it all, there's a trust factor as far as your assistants, and you got to hire good ones and all of that. But at first he's like, we're running my defense, we're running my stuff, and I want it done right. So I'm going to do it. And then we'll go from there. And I like it. I like that mentality. He may turn those reins over to someone eventually once he knows that he can trust them to do what he wants that done. But He's not just going to walk in and be like, yeah, I'm not calling plays anymore.
Well, the interesting thing about Mike Macdonald is he talked about, having a schematic, an aggressive scheme, but also versatility. Versatility from his players able to do multiple different things, varied defensive approaches depending on teams that they face. They'll play split safeties, but then coverages like quarters and cover 6, like you'd mentioned before, Tampa 2 even. You don't blitz as much, but you threaten to blitz. You disguise your blitzes, and it's kind of a cool defense to watch if you pay attention. And I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of a defensive guy anyway. I like the offensive stuff, but I'm super excited about having a good defense again, which is something that we haven't seen. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Seattle's roster or Baltimore's roster, what we could kind of expect a little bit. Who gets retained? Do they bring back Bobby Wagner, for example? Do they bring back Jordan Brooks? Patrick Queen says he's wants to be available in free agency this year. Do they bring Patrick Queen over from the Ravens? That's what I was going to bring up
here in a minute. Is I would, if you're going to spend on Jordan Brooks, you're going to spend on Patrick Queen, who the coaching staff knows, and you've seen him be successful.
Okay, so what about the overall philosophy? We've talked about this many, many times. Pete Carroll invested heavily in his linebackers and safeties. It seems like Baltimore does the same thing. Is there a reason for that?
I think it's cyclical. If you look at Baltimore, they invested really heavily on their defensive line and their pass rushers, guys like Terrell Suggs, right? And then those guys moved on, and they re-upped the linebackers and safeties and drafted a bunch of defensive linemen and stuff.
And they traded for Roquan Smith last year,
where Patrick Queen's going to leave because they can't retain him and Roquan Smith. And all of these young defensive linemen are going to start to get paid, and you're going to see it shift back to the line as far as where their resource allocation is. It's been very cyclical with them over John Harbaugh's tenure. And, like I said, McDonald's not going to have the same guys.
Yeah.
He's going to have to adapt to the talent Seattle has, which is in different places. But a guy like Patrick Queen comes in, and he's just such a perfect fit for the middle of that defense. He was great in Baltimore in the middle of that defense. So having him come over and kind of take over from Bobby Wagner as the
quarterback,
as the leader, as the guy in the middle, the guy that puts everyone in place, and it kind of just fits. Now, can Seattle afford that? Are they willing to? I don't know. That's up to John Schneider, but it makes a lot of sense. And if you're looking at spending $13 million a year on Jordan Brooks, and $5 million a year on Bobby Wagner, can you go $18 million for Patrick Queen and not bring back either of the other two guys? It's a possibility. And then you draft someone to put beside him.
Yeah.
I will say that you mentioned versatility, and that's one of the things that's going to be key. Guys got to be able to.
And we're good at that, especially on the back end in our defense.
Yeah, I mean, well, kind of. We are with some players. I like that you've got guys like Michael Jackson and Tariq Woolen and who tackle like safeties. Well, not Woolen this last year, but as a rookie he did. But not as cornerbacks, but you've also got you got safeties like Julian Love that can cover. This is part of why I think that Jamal Adams is done in Seattle. This just really just cemented it because he can't cover. And so he's not versatile. And yet with what McDonald wants his players to do, he wants players to be versatile. It's also why I don't think Bobby Wagner is coming back because
he's lost too much of a step to be able to cover.
He can't cover anymore. It's so frustrating to see because he's such a just phenomenal player in his prime, and he's still really valuable to a team. But he can't cover like he used to, and he's great against the run and all of that, but he's a liability against the pass, and I think that's going to mean he's not coming back. And but you got guys like Boye Mafe who can do everything, and Derek Hall, which on paper can do everything, and we'll see if he develops the way Boye Mafe does or did, and becomes.
And
more
he
of
coached
that guy.
Mike Morris in Michigan, so that'll be kind of an interesting watch.
Mike Morris was so excited
I'm
about
sure
having Macdonald. He was like, do you read the quotes and stuff from him?
I have not.
I have never seen quotes about a guy being happier about a coaching hire. It was crazy. And that, I mean, I don't know. It stood out. I was just like, whoa.
And Oluwatimi at center, same sort of thing.
And
even though he was on the other side of the ball.
He wasn't even, he's on the other side of the ball, but he was like, oh man, this is awesome. This is a home run. Like you can't do better. And I was like,
the one single player that I thought of most when I thought about this hire and that's on the Seahawks roster that's going to benefit the most is Tariq Woolen, a guy that was came out in his rookie season and it was just really amazing. And then I don't know what happened, and you add in, and I'm speculating now, but Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams, in his ear all year, and something happened there. He had the injury. And something happened there where he wasn't tackling well. He was just not himself. And I think that a guy like Mike Macdonald and his scheme is going to really light a fire. So I'm kind of excited to see that. And a guy like Trey Brown, when I talked about diversity in your ability to play multiple looks and schemes and so forth, Trey Brown came to mind on something like that. Devon Witherspoon.
Spoon comes to mind. Brown,
you know what I mean?
Brown and Spoon are both not the biggest guys. They're not Tariq Woolen and Mike Jackson, but they both tackle. They're both physical players. I mean, Spoon much more than Brown, but Brown is still a physical guy for a cornerback, and they do a lot of different things. They can play man, they can play zone, they can do whatever you want them to do, and those are guys that kind of versatility. And Julian Love, his versatility of being able to play deep, play up.
Well, the way that he uses Kyle Hamilton there at safety in Baltimore. I mean, we both like Kyle Hamilton coming out of the draft, but man, they maximized his talent really well in his second season. And we don't currently have a player like that on the roster. If there was, it would be Jamal Adams, and Jamal Adams is
nothing like that. I mean, he's physically got some of the talents, but he does not cover anywhere near the way Hamilton does.
But Julian Love, maybe.
Yeah. I like that. There's just a lot going on as far as guys that will really benefit. I'm much more interested in what they do up front. I look at Baltimore's, and they've got
like Leonard Williams maybe coming back.
Yeah. I mean, Leonard Williams maybe coming back. What do they do with Dre Jones? Because he did not live up to his contract this year. They're kind of stuck with him, but he was so good before, and the talent is there. It's like, can they get more out of that, or is it a case of a guy got paid and now doesn't now isn't putting in the effort? I don't want to think that about a guy like that. We won't know until next year, but it's a possibility because he just didn't live up to what he had done in the past, and that's a little scary considering his age. He's only 26.
So new head coach. We have yet to do an offensive coordinator, so it's almost impossible to know what they might do on offense. You could look to Baltimore, but I don't think that is even a window into what they would want to do. But more importantly, what do you think about the quarterback position? Did you hear anything out of the press conference that would give you a clue as to what they would want to do with Geno Smith? I know that he mentioned Drew Lock several times, and Drew Lock's an unrestricted free agent, and they mentioned him several times.
Drew Lock significantly more than they mentioned Geno Smith,
which I found very interesting to me.
And I agree. That was like, that's weird. It does kind of feel like they're leaning, cutting Geno loose, giving him the June 1st designation to save the cap number, and realizing that they can get his production, or at least most of his production, for a fraction of the cost while they bridge to a younger quarterback. I agree. I don't think you can base what Seattle's going to do offensively based on Baltimore, because Baltimore has a unique talent. There's only one Lamar. And you're not going to mimic that. You're not going to be able to recreate that. It's like Pete Carroll trying to recreate what he had with Earl Thomas. You're just never going to find the next guy. And so they're going to have to do based on what they have for talent. And if you can bring a guy like Locke back on the cheap, let Geno go and get most of that production and be okay with that, that might get them that transition year and get them through it. I don't know.
One of these weird offensive coordinator candidates give you a window into seeing.
Well, I look at
Ryan Grubb is kind of a run first kind of a guy. Michael Penix obviously had a great year under him or two. Does it point to them maybe looking at Penix in the draft if Ryan Grubb is your offensive coordinator?
Oh, if it's Grubb, I think they'll be in on Penix if he's around at 16, which he might be actually.
I think that's a little early for Penix.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I think so too. But I think they would. I think that would be a possibility if they go that way. But he's a guy that does like to run the ball and run it well and throw off of that. But they did throw a lot. Penix threw for more yards than anybody in the country, right? And that doesn't happen, by chance.
And they had a great offensive line.
Yeah. So that kind of gives you an idea. He does like to run the ball, though. He likes to get, a lot of third and shorts. If you're going to have third down, it better be 3rd and 3 or less, and then go from there. And then you look at what they do in Detroit, and they've got Jared Goff, and they've taken a guy that was just terrible with the Rams and turned him into a competent quarterback. In a lot of that scheme, right? And a lot of that is they've got some really talented running backs. They run the ball well. They get the ball out of the backfield into the running back's hands in space really well. They scheme it.
And we've got those things.
A really good offensive line. They had 2 All-Pros on Detroit's offensive line at center and right tackle. So you look at that, and I think if the 2 guys that they've interviewed, that they've talked to me say they're going to invest in the offensive line. Get some guys in there that are going to. I totally
agree. I'm so happy you said that.
Going to dominate there, and that is more important than an elite quarterback, because you've seen Jared Goff do well, that kind of thing. So to me, that's what it points to. But until we get an offensive coordinator, it's speculation. Yeah. It really is. Like, we don't know anything. And so, yeah.
Right. Like Jackson Powers Johnson, the offensive center from Oregon, comes to mind. Had a great week at the Senior Bowl. We're going to do a Senior Bowl show here probably tomorrow after the game is played. But that guy. There's the guy from Oregon State, the offensive tackle. I can't remember his name right off the bat. Christian Haynes had a great week at the Senior Bowl as an interior offensive guard or center. I agree. I think the transfers are going to be invested in based on those selections, and based on the idea, I think that the Seahawks organization is going to give Macdonald some leeway, some time. I think they're interested to see if they can be competitive in year 1, but I don't think that that's the overarching goal, is to have him win right away. I think the overarching goal is to do it right and to build a roster that is sustainable, and that's going to take 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, but I think they also think that there's enough talent here to win.
Yes,
John said that over.
Also,
and over
they're
again.
thinking about jettisoning their quarterback for less expensive version too. So I mean, there's some things there that give you clues as to maybe they're okay, doing what they do next year, but then really building on a new quarterback after that.
Yeah. I like the move. I like what the Seahawks are doing. Especially on defense, there's going to be a transition. It's going to take them a minute. It's going to take them a hot second to get all the guys in place, because you have one safety that's any good, and Julian Love. You have
Baltimore had a couple of 335-pound defensive tackles.
They had a 355-pound nose tackle.
Okay.
Right. And so you got to find that guy, because Seahawks don't have a nose tackle. So you got to go find a dominant nose. You need more safety help. You need middle linebackers. There's work to be done on actually just fixing the roster, and you don't have a lot of cap space. I mean, you will when you get rid of the dead weight like Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs and
I think
Brian
you can generate
May.
$60 million. I think they're gonna have $60 million. If Gino's not there, they're gonna have $60 million.
Yeah, if 40, if he is 60, if they cut him, and they may not have to cut him. They may be able to trade him
or rework the contract, depending. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, we'll see.
It's one of those things where you can see a lot of different scenarios happening, but there's not a ton of room. And if you go out and let's say you go get, Patrick Queen to anchor your defense in the middle, now what do you have left that you can spend on just the defense? So there's going to be a lot of draft picks. They're going to be young again on defense. But yeah, I know John wants to win right away. Crazy. John wants to win year one, but that defense is going to take some time to get all the pieces. That's just too many pieces to get all of them in place. And the offense they've got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback, not just, in 2024, but, for the next decade. And they've got to fix the offensive line, which has been that's Pete Carroll's blind spot and has been his whole time in Seattle. And they can't do that anymore. And I know part of this last year, it was bad because Lucas's knee got hurt and he was such an integral part of all their plans. He's their best offensive lineman, or at least he was the year before. And so he never really played up to that level. That really hurt, but they need to figure out what's going on with that knee and if they can trust it going forward. And if they can, then good, but they still need to figure out center and left guard. What happens if they're not going to run a zone scheme anymore? Yeah. Because you go to a power scheme, right? And all of a sudden you got guys like Oluwatimi on the roster that just don't fit. They don't belong in a power scheme.
He's not a lightweight by any means, though.
No, but
320 pounds.
But he's not powerful. He's not a mauler. He's not a guy that's going to push people out of the way. He's a guy that's going to force guys to move laterally, and that's what the zone scheme requires that you do. And Damian Lewis won't be coming back if they switch, right? I mean, that's. Did
you see Jackson Powers Johnson at the Senior Bowl, Keith?
I saw a little bit of it.
So he only practiced for 2 days and then he was out. Got a little injury, opted out just because he'd shown what he needed to show to be in the first round. Guy is amazing. So if you do go to a power scheme, he's your guy. Like he'd be the center that you would build around for a decade.
And the thing is that Bradford, the guy they drafted and he got a lot of playing time at right guard and was significantly better than the starter, is a guy that fits a power scheme.
Yeah.
He genuinely does. So if you can, draft Powers Johnson, let's say you get him at 16 Lucas. Or you move back a little bit and you get him and you stick him right in the middle. Now you've got those two guys. You've got Abe Lucas on the right. That you can run behind that like crazy. Cross is still he's good enough to play in any scheme. And your left guard is your left tackle is supposed to more be about pass blocking than run blocking anyway. So yeah, there's that. That is one thing that I find interesting. If you go with the Seahawks, end up with Penix as a quarterback, because now the right tackle becomes the left tackle in terms of
and I think we're still good with
what you want from people. So that would be weird. That would be interesting.
Fun stuff. I mean, holy cow, there's just a lot to think about and talk about over the next couple months as we lead up to the draft. We're going to come back tomorrow and talk about Senior Bowl. Like I mentioned, we've got a week of practices to kind of talk about, as well as the game being played on Saturday. And and they're going to be hiring probably offensive assistants in the next 4 or 5 days, get that in motion. They're may be making decisions on Geno potentially on contract status by mid-February. So there's just amazing.
Yeah, they have less than 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks to figure out what they want to do with Geno and his contract. If they can get it reworked, if they're going to cut him, or if they're going to keep him.
All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast on your favorite podcast platforms and our YouTube channel. And hit that subscribe button if you could. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.